58 people will survive. Why government have not let them speak out? If something happens to Korean Peninsula militarily, then it will become automatically the regional war, 100% nuclear war.
That collision has to be managed. I think there's a real danger in the West and countries that are outside of the region to confuse North Korea's, Pyongyang's very hostile rhetoric, just inflamed rhetoric. It's not called the Hermit Kingdom for anything.
Have been, as I said, demonized.
They're very cautious. South Korean culture is hot. We like South Korean music, film. North Korea is an oddity to us. We feel very strange. They're ETs. They're from outer space.
Welcome back to China Log. Joining me in the studio is Professor Jung Ki-yul from Tsinghua University, and Yoichi Shimatsu is a Japanese-American former editor of the Japan Times. We're talking about the current situation in the Korean Peninsula, probably the most sensitive time in diplomatic and political terms since the end of the Korean War. We're talking about who was responsible for the sinking of the Chenoan. At the moment, there's a diplomatic impasse. We've got China not believing the official line that the South Koreans are taking, that there's overwhelming evidence that the North Koreans are responsible, and the Americans taking that line and saying that China should take a stand against North Korea. We've been talking in the first half of China Log how it was perhaps an accident, not caused by a torpedo at all, but a mine. And you suggested, Professor Chung, that the Americans were happy for the North Koreans to take the flak in order to maintain its strategic alliance in the area. So some pretty contentious things have been discussed so far.
Yes,
so let's continue in the next 30 minutes. Let's talk about the recent visit by Kim Jong-il when he met Hu Jintao. And Kim Jong-il reassured, apparently, Hu Jintao that absolutely categorically they had absolutely nothing to do with it. I know you are in a very privileged position because you advise all sorts of Chinese politicians. What do you think might have been said to persuade Hu Jintao that actually the North Koreans weren't responsible?
It's been in the media just published that Mr. Kim said to Mr. Hu that North Korea is nothing to do with the incident. That's I'm quoting from the media. But what the world should look into from his official visit to China is more strategic. The message in all that the 5 days staying in China to American side, that the Chinese and the North Koreans together saying that we will continue to work together and cooperate, and particularly China is determined to help the North Koreans economically. Then that economic aid to North Korea sort of makes the 1874 UN resolution to punish North Korea, quote-unquote, the second nuclear test last year, nullify. Whatever the world does to punish the North Korea, as long as China does help the North Korea economically, the 1874 resolution will not work. So that from the U.S. side and the South Korean side, I mean, the U.S. alliance with Japan and the South Korea, that as many scholars saying that U.S. has looked for a new strategy to something to replace that not working strategy until which worked until last year, but not anymore. Right then, as I said, the Chenoan incident came in. So that the U.S., as American friends also saying, taking that case to reintroduce new UN Security Council resolution, which they are looking for now. But it seems to me that China and the two key countries, the UN Security Council permanent members, not buying it. That's where the U.S. and South Korea in trouble with this Chenoan incident.
Do you go along with that, Yuchi?
Oh, absolutely. I think now the Security Council resolution is pretty much in trouble. There's enough doubt out there and then not just with China and Russia. I think many, many countries of the world would say, particularly ones that are outside of NATO, would say there's really grounds for questioning whether this Council resolution is appropriate at this time, whether the language of tougher sanctions is appropriate at this time. And this sort of sets back, in some ways, this whole agenda of containing the rising power, naval power of Iran and also of China, North Korea. And so the U.S., I think, deployment of forward forces all around the region, the Israeli, I think, movement into the Persian Gulf, sending nuclear submarines into the Persian Gulf. All these things are now in sort of limbo right now. Well, I think an anticipated conflict maybe for this year, the summer, autumn, will have to be postponed. And now there's a sort of new negotiating space for a new round of diplomacy. If there's any silver lining to the crisis, both sides realize we are close to war and we've got to do talking, and compromises have to be made on both sides of the line.
Do you sense a real volatility? I mean, since the North Koreans have said, well, the peace accord since the end of 1953 is now off the table.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like all bets are off, let's start again. Do you feel there's more of a volatility because of something like that?
You know, that the Cuban president, Fidel Castro, the former president, the June 3rd, issued a very critical article saying Obama administration might attack North Korea using this Chenoan incident. And then he specifically asked China must do everything possible to stop within the UN Security Council, not, to let the war broke out in the region. He also saying that Israel might attack Iran with the nuclear weapons. He specifically mentioned it. I think that the world in China and Russia and the Koreans, in both North and South Korea, buying that, meaning that the possibility of military confrontation in Korean Peninsula will not be limited, confined to the Korean Peninsula. It will become a regional.
But no one wants war.
It's a nuclear war. It's not only Koreans become the disaster, the victim, but also the Chinese, the Japanese, and everybody. So that the warning from the Fidel Castro, probably one of the best person who knows more in depth of American politics.
You know, again, people watching this will say, well, Fidel Castro obviously wasn't a friend of America, so he's going to say that as well.
I know.
Yeah, but I think one of the real problems, I think, in this whole issue, whether it's Obama or the more hardline hawks that were around McCain, neither side really wants to confront the coming reality of American military retreat from its defensive commitment, from its global policekeeping commitments right now. And I think this is the real problem. America's got this unprecedented debt that it cannot manage or handle. It's got a massive environmental crisis now. And it just cannot afford to keep up all the frontiers and fortresses now. And the question is, what replaces the U.S. president when the 7th Fleet and the 5th Fleet begin to pull back?
One of the things I'm interested in is that why do you both think China is not prepared to budge on this current Chenoan issue, whereas only a year ago, when it was at the UN, it went along with the North Korean issue and against sanctions on missile exports. But this time it's digging its heels and going, you know what, this time we're not going along with what everyone else is going. Why are they taking such a view now and such a kind of a definite stance on this?
According to the Chinese scholars and experts and a number of important friends in China, they say that they have learned a lot of lessons from quote-unquote North Korea's nuclear crisis. That they've joined the United States, they've joined the world to punish the North Korea. After that, the 20 years of the long history, they say that their role shouldn't take part in a one side and then punishing their neighbor, one of the key allies, will not help their nations in terms of national security and economic development at all after 20 years of the history. So they say their role should be changed, not join a party to denounce, to punish the other party. Instead, be more prudent, more cautious before they make some final conclusion. They say this time, they said they joined the United States until last year to challenge the North Korea's nuclear development. But this time they say we cannot simply follow and believe because you said so, unless you show us the proof, as the President Medvedev, the Russian president, on the phone with the President Lee Myung-bak, when Lee Myung-bak asked for help, he said, unless you show us the proof which could be scientifically proven 100%, we cannot help South Korea.
Just out of interest, what would be scientific proof in terms of the Chinese perspective?
To let others see what they have, 58 people were survived from Chenoan incident, while 46 died. None of these 58 people, as many the Chinese scholars arguing, why government have not let them speak out? Why they have been
Give eyewitness accounts.
exactly why they are the ones who must have known what happened, but they have been shut down from the very beginning of the incident to the hospital, quote unquote, because they are psychologically unstable. So they put into the hospital. How would you call it, the mental hospital. Since then, none of the media, none of the people, international community have been able to get to talk to them. Then how would you say we come to believe you while you are not letting us in to
So
see?
China would like to have eyewitness accounts from these 58 and conclusive proof?
Yes, ma'am. They, according to the Chinese friends, that China helping South Korean government position, meaning the face saving, not publicly, but the indirectly checked with the American government, invite us into the investigation team. We are the neighbor of the Korean Peninsula. And let the North Korean people, since they asking to
And that's been refused, hasn't it?
has
still?
been refused.
Yeah.
So more suspicion, more speculation has come out since then.
Okay, let me turn to you, Chi. Why do you think China's changed its stance on and not going along with what everyone else is saying? I mean, because I go back from our original discussion, there is, as far as quite a majority of the world is concerned, overwhelming evidence that the North Koreans did it, according to the South Korean
Well, I
International
think the perception
Investigation.
in China that if it is seen as abandoning this ally, its leverage over North Korea would radically decrease. North Korea was once patronized by the Soviet Union and learned and suffered through for many years, but kept its military force up. People were starving, but they were very determined to maintain its independence. These are very tough cookies. And China realizes starving them doesn't work. It only makes them more militant and hostile. Therefore, if we want something like multilateral talks on the nuclear issue, if we want to have arms limitations in the East China Sea, Yellow Sea, and so on, if we want procedures to handle crisis, you've got to have an open line in North Korea and be seen as their friend, not as their adversary, not ganging up. In a certain sense, the hardliners in North Korea, maybe there's actually some people in the Russian military who wouldn't mind that. It would be a beautiful card for them to play, against the rest of the world. I think the Chinese realize that they have to be integrated into the international community, as stubborn and resistant as they are. And similar with Iran, that there has to be a new type of strategic thinking, very similar to how the U.S. and Soviet Union used to deal with. That was a much greater level of threat for the United States when you had massive Soviet arsenal facing them, but strategic talks were developed, arm limitation, new rules were developed. Neither side became really friendly until the fall of the Soviet Union, but regime change was at that time never spoken of as being the ultimate goal. It was mainly to keep the peace, and I think this is what China wants to do. We realize there's different kinds of social systems out there, political systems out there, a lot of unevenness of development, but we have to keep the peace because that's the only road forward. I think this is the Chinese mentality. Very cautious, a lot of probity.
But do you think, Yoshi, that there might be many people in the West thinking, well, it's at a price that China wants to keep this peace? Because, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, China's been very stubborn over this issue. It won't come out and punish North Korea. It won't come out and take a stance. It calls for calm and restraint and is continually underplaying this situation, as you say, because there's a lot of self-interest. And some might question that this by self-interest rather than actually wanting to get to the truth of the situation?
China's policy, I think, has been one really based on patience. They can wait out a problem for decades. I mean, there were two wars with India. It often had a strategic advantage, did not press that advantage. So China, I think, has, I think the word to use is probity. They're very cautious, would like to see evolutionary change rather than radical change occurred. And the rest of the world, I think, is very impatient right now. The Western world is faced with all sorts of crises, wants to get this thing off the table, wants to get Iran and North Korea off the table and into history. And China says it's not going to happen quickly. It probably won't happen in this generation. We're just going to have to tough it out and wait. This is a country with 5,000 years of civilized history. Their perspective is quite different from a very young Europe or an even younger United States.
China shares with the borders with 15 nations, and the Chinese government all along saying to keep friendly, peaceful relationship with our neighbors, the #1 priority for our national security and particularly the economic development. Then the northeastern region where the North Korea is located and the eastern coastal line are the fundamental politically, militarily most important the region within the whole the vast Chinese territory. If something happens in Korean Peninsula, if something happens to North Korea, then China will have any buffer, quote-unquote buffer, in that part of the region. I think the many Chinese scholars and experts saying that if something happens to North Korea, then we will have no protection in that extremely sensitive, important military, economic, and the political region of our nation. And so from their perspective, for the interest of the national interest for the Chinese people, they probably approach different from the past because they were about to lose through the North Korea's nuclear crisis. North Korea was about to get away from China when China joined U.S. to punish them. Susan, before we move to the next point, let me just reiterate the importance of the peaceful resolution. As I mentioned before, if something happens to Korean Peninsula militarily, then it will become automatically the regional war. Then that's not the conventional war anymore. It will be definitely 100% nuclear war.
How can you be so certain of that?
Because the South Korea, there are 12 nuclear power plants. If any one of them being hit with missile, whatever the bombs, then whole Korean Peninsula will become exposed. Exposed to not only Korean Peninsula but also the region. Why? I think China. If I'm sitting in the Chinese leadership, the friends, then I wouldn't let anything such as the Korean Peninsula going into another war, which will make us, China, as well, brought into the nuclear war. Japan, same thing. So the war or military confrontation will not serve anybody.
Well, we are talking about the Chenoan incident, and we have had a lot of speculation in this discussion, and it's gone off in all sorts of tangents. Let's just bring us back a little bit to the initial premise that the Chenoan was sunk, according to the South Koreans and the international investigation, by the North Koreans. If that is the case, and I know that neither of you go along with that, why would the North Koreans do it? What would be in it? Given the fragility of the whole region, why would the North Koreans sink a South Korean warship?
In the past there have been Korean terrorist attacks in Burma against the South Korean cabinet when they were visiting a few decades ago. We've seen landings using these mini-subs with covert operations in South Korean territory. So North Korea is capable of launching these very bold, daring actions, often to test its soldiers, test its the defenses of the opponents. But these, I think, were always based in some sort of power struggle within North Korea. And at this time, it seems that the transition where Kim Jong-il is preparing the transition to a third generation of Kims in North Korea is going along much more smoothly. I think there's very much less military opposition, very much less opposition in the Workers' Party. So I don't think there's that internal engine of dynamic to have this dramatic terrorist incident to force everyone to unite. I think the North Koreans are pretty much focused on economic development. They see how wealth is being enjoyed, prosperity, all across Asia. And they're the slowest country of development in Asia.
But given at the time of the sinking of the Chenoan, there was a US South Korean military exercise going on at that time. And obviously there would have been North Korean surveillance, inevitably. Is it not possible that it too was an accident? That North Korea felt it was under attack and fired a torpedo?
According to South Korean, the naval military headquarters, the official documents, the first official reports to the headquarters from the Chenoan, the naval vessel, we were grounded, not hit by torpedo. We were grounded. The same thing, the South Korean naval police headquarters reported to the military, the headquarters, that the Chenoan vessel was grounded. But all these crucial information was silenced. And TOD, the TOD, technical, has not been shown to the public for that portion when the Chenoan incident was broken into two pieces. They say somehow that portion was gone, but they are showing other pieces of the whole TOD, the scene. So, again, I'm not going into saying that they did or not. I think the black and white approach will not help people to understand the whole incident. As I said, that why it has happened, again, that the strategic reason, but no matter why it happened, that I think the people in the region must approach with, again, civility, patience, and rationality.
It's what you're both saying is patience.
Well, I think there's a real danger in the West and countries that are outside of the region to confuse North Korea's, Pyongyang's very hostile rhetoric, just inflamed rhetoric, their posturing, their threats, saber rattling, with their what they're doing on the ground. During this Fold Eagle exercise, the North Korean forces were locked down. All they were doing were watching the American ships that they don't get attacked and prepare, if they are attacked, to respond to that. They were very lying low, despite, over the radio and television, they're making these loud proclamations against this imperialist attackers and so on, and aggression, that, in fact, they're a very cautious country. It's not called the Hermit Kingdom for anything. I mean, it is the Hermit Kingdom. They just want to be left alone. And if we can understand that, I think that's the beginning of negotiating with North Korea. We're going to leave you alone, but we're going to talk with you and leave us alone. That's the other side of the equation.
Well, we're beginning to talk about the Chinese perspective, and Blue Ocean Network has a news program. And part of the newsroom, we have a thing called the Net Check. Yeah. And we went out on the street to ask a lot of Chinese people what they thought. Yes. And a lot of the Chinese internet users seem to feel it's simply none of China's business. They say North Korea is an independent country, and its actions don't depend on China. And if South Korea, and this is an interesting question you might like both to answer, if South Korea wants China to take some action, just what would they want it to do? What do you think? I mean, how would you answer that? Well, I think the attitude toward North Korea is, among the Chinese population, has undergone a sea change. We've seen a generation pass of volunteers who went to fight the UN invasion of the Koreas in the Korean War. Many thousands of Chinese sacrificed their lives for North Korea's independence. But that generation is basically gone now. The younger people, they cast a suspicious eye at North Korea. They say, why aren't these people aboard? South Korean culture is hot. We like South Korean music, film. North Korea is an oddity to us. We feel very strange. They're ETs. They're from outer space. So I think the Chinese attitude in the public is not that North Korea is their best friends. The lips and teeth analogy that was used in the past, that's gone now. So the Chinese are more skeptical, and from this position of skepticism, they're skeptical about the Chenoan incident. So this is not out of pure friendship that they are.
I've been teaching in China now 4 years, and in my observation, assessment of Chinese population, not much different from the world in terms of their understanding, knowledge of quote-unquote DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, no. Meaning that because I've been known as a Korea expert, been to North Korea a number of times. What I know is much different from what people think about North Korea. There are people But I'm not sitting here to quote unquote beautifying of that part of the world. That they are the same as we are, the same people. But that somehow, for some reason, including this incident, they have been, as I said, demonized.
Let's talk about friendship, and let's talk
Yeah.
about the future relationship of US and China. Hillary Clinton was here a while back for economic and strategic talks, and it was billed as a great success. And then here we are just a few weeks later. Maybe the friends are not quite as friendly as they were when she was here. I mean, would you like to...
According to South Korean media, and also from AP, the Hillary Clinton was burst out with anger when she arrived in Seoul, Korea, about her not being fully respected while she was in China, meaning that U.S. came, as many say, with the two purposes. One, that getting Chinese support for the Chenoan incident case. The second is about the economic issues. But as the world knows, that the U.S. has the debt to China, $2.4 trillion.
Yeah.
It's a debtor and the debt country. And so there's already the relationship between US and China is not anymore the 20 or 10 years ago. At the moment, it is much more, but they are interconnected,
Yeah.
interdependent, intertwined relationship. Anyway, for the political, the aspect, the Chenoan incident, the case, the Hillary wasn't able to get Chinese support. Instead, it seems to me, in the language in South Korean media, very cold reaction from the Chinese side. Didn't buy any arguments apparently didn't buy any argument from the Hillary Clinton side. She said it when she arrived in Korea, advising the South Korean officials, you better prepare yourself when you deal with China because they're not buying what you have presented to.
What do you think about China-US relations?
Well, I think, overall, let's face it, they're not really enemies. They're global partners. The financial issues, the debt issues, trade partners, a lot of that is out of balance, out of kilter. Both sides have a lot of work to do. China's got to buy more American goods. America's got to somehow manage its debt and draw that down. The tasks are ahead. We're facing much larger challenges. Let's say the global warming we seem to have forgotten about in this last year. There's huge global challenges that these two countries must lead the world in. The Security Council has got to move away from being an insecurity council to a real security, helping the world pull together with a massive problem. The Chenoan incident, which nearly brought us a nuclear war upon our heads, I think in a few months is going to be a laughing matter. I think South Korean, American, and Chinese sailors are going to be, and North Korean sailors might be laughing over a beer over this thing, that it was a sort of a tempest in a teacup. What's really important are these much larger issues we must cooperate on. We have no choice.
So as an American citizen working in China, knowing both ends, I might advise that my administration, which is American administration, the longer U.S. pushes this Chenoan incident, the worse their position.
So you're saying to the Americans, back off?
Right. I mean, I believe China and Russia and North Korea, I believe anybody probably will buy in if U.S. changes strategy. Then they will help their face, the saving face, instead, the bombarding the U.S. position or the South Korean position, even South Korean position. I believe there will be some negotiation, so win-win negotiation. Otherwise, this Chenoan incident will make further the U.S. China and U.S. Russia and then U.S. North Korea, anybody in the region will, further they push, the worse the relationship will become. So that will be my advice for the American government to take a different route.
Yeah.
To help everybody.
I think peace is not surrender for either side.
No.
This is what we have to understand.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, peace will come through the negotiation and dialogue, such as a China dialogue.
It's been a great pleasure having this China dialogue with you both. My many thanks to Professor Jung Yul from Tsinghua University and Yoichi Shimatsu, former editor of the Japan Weekly. Thank you both very much indeed for dialoguing with me.
Wonderful job.
Well, this is the end of China Log. Thanks for watching. I'm Susan Osman. Bye for now.